Get a bit of my tea too. Hey everyone.
We have similar mugs.
Let's see, yours looks a little bit, I think mine has some kind of, I don't know, maybe
street scene.
Colonial. Yeah. Mine's
mine's more pastoral.
River. Oh, Porto. Mine's I think it's probably a Portuguese kind of antiquated.
Nice.
Anyway, okay, everyone. Welcome to the very first of this interview series that I'm starting doing, just kind of introducing you all to different businesses and individuals that I think are really making an impact on the, fungi and beyond scene in Canada. I'm Robin Mercy, and I'm very happy today to be chatting to my friend Kim Watt. She owns Thimble Hill Nursery, which is a plant nursery garden homestead just outside of Nelson, BC. So yeah, thanks so much, Kim, for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
So why don't we just start by talking a little bit about Thimble Hill, kind of, what it is, what you're doing right now, what your vision is for it, and how it got started.
Yeah. As you said, Thimble Hill is a small nursery just north of Nelson. My focus is on edible and useful perennials, but I grow some annuals as well, and really focus on food forest plants. We have a small 1 acre food forest that's in development. So any plants that would fit in that like multi-storey orchard, everything from nut trees, fruit trees, berries, ground covers, anything that can kind of integrate into that ecosystem food system is what I focus on. So it's a lot of fun. I get to like collect and curate plants that I'm interested in growing and then make those available to other people. It's also our home. My husband and I bought it in 2016 and we built a house, and we have 2 kids, Ben and Felix, who are kind of part of our system as well. But I run the orchard and the nursery full time now. So it's been great. We've been going since 2018 has been when I've been like focusing on the nursery. So it's still pretty young in the realm of farm businesses, but every year we grow and get a bit more diversified. And it's a pretty fun way to spend my time.
Yeah. And having been out there and seen the site, what was it like when you moved in? I mean, in some ways it seems like it might have some, very local challenges just growing on your particular piece of property. It's quite steep. I don't know if there was any kind of agriculture there before you moved in. It seems kind of like just down from you.
Yeah, it was not agricultural at all. It was an empty lot that had a fair bit of machine activity from previous owners and neighbors, and parts of the soil were super compacted and had soil stripped off of certain areas, boulders added, areas were definitely degraded. And there were no trees. So it was like a blank slate. There's a few conifers around the perimeter, but like the 1.25 acres that we have it was pretty cleared. So that was at least as a starting point. I kind of didn't have much to work around. I could start from scratch. And that was a cool opportunity, and also the opportunity to look at something that was definitely marginal farmland. We were, 5 to 20% slope, depending on the area. Really good aspect. We're southeast facing. So we have great sun for the Kootenays, which is what drew us to this property. But definitely not what you'd consider agricultural land. But it works really great as an orchard. And that's actually some of the first settlers to come here did put in, there was a big ranch and orchard here in the early 1900s that the initial land clearing was done for that. So it has a bit of an agricultural history, but nothing had been done on the land before we got here.
And I think that's really interesting because, the way I see it, one of the great things you're trying to do and succeeding at doing is just really localizing. Like in your selection, I know you carry a lot of, fairly cold hardy, locally adapted varieties, again, mostly the perennials, but it's I think you're calling it maybe not like it's not the greatest valley bottom farmland, but especially here locally in the Kootenays, I think a lot of people are dealing with very similar challenges. So I think it's cool that even to get your propagation side of this business going, you kind of had to face head on like making this of a working farm site and dealing with the specific challenges, slope, rocky soil, whatever, because I feel that's really typical of a lot of, especially smaller growers' experience here in the mountains of BC. So
totally. Yeah. So many of our farms and the places that feed our communities are like carved out of the forest and on hillsides and, not conventional farmland by any means. So it's great to have firsthand experience figuring out, okay, well, I want to practice no-till growing anyway, but I couldn't till in a lot of parts of my land because there's so many rocks and it's just like, it's a very different scenario. So yeah, there's a lot of learning for sure, figuring out how to build soil in this kind of context, and make good usable land out of something that was, at one point conifer forest, but hasn't had much put into it in 50 years or so.
Yeah. So let's dig into that, pun kind of intended. So yeah, like, and this kind of ties in because obviously a bunch of my viewers will be maybe coming at this from an interest in fungi and mushrooms, and that's obviously a big part of soil creation. So like, just in a nutshell, in a minute or two, what are some of the successful ways you've managed to build soil over the course of, you said, from 2018 on, so that's 4 or 5 years now?
Yeah. Definitely just welcoming whatever biomass I can get my hands on. So we're really lucky in that there's a lot of wind in our neighborhood and we have a lot of trees. And so there's a lot of arborists who work around here. So I get a lot of wood chips dropped off. And I know a lot of parts in the Kootenays don't have that. Maybe there's more demand on the wood chips, but luckily here we get a pretty steady stream. So I do a lot of wood chip based mulch, and composting systems with a lot of wood chips incorporated. So that becomes a lot of the actual organic matter. And we've talked about this lots in the past, that king stropharia is a big part of our system. So I have several big mother beds of king stropharia mushrooms, and I feed them anytime I can get my hands on some fresh deciduous wood chips. And then they break that down really rapidly into super nice soil. And then I put that directly in my garden beds, whether it's veggie beds, whether it's perennials. All of our pathways are inoculated with stropharia. And so, yeah, just continually adding that high carbon mulch really helps to keep breaking down and adding to the soil. I follow like the basic no-till living soil principles, like try to keep a living root in the soil. So using cover crops, using continuous ground covers wherever I can, trying to have a diversity of species in any bed so as to feed a diversity of soil microbes and fungi. Just try to keep the ground not exposed as well. Like I said, we're not mechanized, so everything's done by hand. And as soon as we dig out of bed, like the biggest disturbance we have to our soil is when I have to dig out a crop of trees, because I have to go down pretty deep, like 18 inches, and it is definitely turning over the soil layers. But then really quickly after that, cover that back up with some fresh compost, some wood chips, some straw, whatever I can get my hands on. And also in composting, we get food scraps, especially a lot of coffee grounds delivered from town. So that's great, getting manure, getting food scraps. And ducks, we have our own flock of ducks, which produces a ton of really nice, really balanced bedding, which goes directly into our compost piles. And that helps as well to kickstart all our compost systems.
Super cool. Yeah, I mean, king stropharia, just, focusing in on the mushroom here, that's one we've used successfully for a number of years. And it's, one of the easiest and just best decomposers of, fairly fresh woody material. It's really insane how quickly it goes to work. So I know you started by saying you are doing some annuals. So is that, and I know with some of the, for example, the trees you're propagating, there's probably a couple year lag just of growing time before you have, products that are ready to sell. So have the annuals been just kind of filling, a financial or market gap in the meantime while you ready the things that you're more, maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I don't know about more passionate about, but it does seem there's a focus on perennials, especially when you get into some of these, no-till, less disturbance, systems you don't want to be
totally
picking up.
Yeah.
But did the annuals also, I guess I was getting to, have a place in the system, like as you're creating the soil?
Yeah, totally. There's a couple of key ones. So I found with like Another soil building technique I use a lot is sheet mulching. Like I'll use a lot of cardboard, and then whatever organic matter we have, whatever compost we have, just layering those on the top of the soil. And the best crop to come after that is squash. So I find a season of like heavily sheet mulched beds in squash, it prepares the soil for the next year's crop so well that squash is like, it's like an accelerator for the process. They can break down anything that's raw. They really are good at smothering and keeping any weeds from popping through, just with their big kind of broad-leafed ground cover canopy there. So yeah, squash is a big focus. And I found following squash, either potatoes are really good because partly the act of having to harvest them, I'm continually refining the soil afterwards, and that makes for a really good perennial bed, or garlic. So I have this year, I'm trying to commit to not grow any more annual crops for we don't have a market garden. I do have a farm stand where last year I grew quite a diversity of annuals to put in our farm stand, but it was just too much work to keep up with all the other projects. So this year I'm just doing squash and garlic are the only commercial annual crops that we have here. And that's mostly because they fit with that soil building system. They're great for that first year of a bed and the second year of a bed. And then once I have those two, then it's ready for the perennials and I can kind of move the succession along.
So are you doing much expansion to your land base currently in terms of just using these methods to prepare more beds, or are you close to being at the area that you want to be managing?
No, yeah, we have quite a bit of room to expand. So like our orchard, putting in a tree, I have chestnut trees that are 30 feet apart, and it's like one stick in the ground, another stick in the ground. Like there's this huge gap of space that's going to be there for, 10 years or so before it gets quite shaded out. So this year, yeah, we're definitely expanding to make more production in that understory in the further afield parts of our space, of our acreage. So like it's kind of 3 zones that are not along pathways where we get to super frequently. So having something like squash that's really low maintenance can still turn that space into something productive while we're waiting, for the trees to start filling in the overstory. So definitely we could probably continue expanding for 3 more years. And then it'll just be rotating the crops that we have in the understory until we run out of sunlight, I guess. Which will take a while.
So I wanted to ask you, it's great. It seems like you're doing a lot of, as I said before, really locally adapted perennial crop trees. How much of that genetic diversity are you trying to create? Are you often getting, existing varieties that you think are already being grown around here or might do well in this climate based on where they've traditionally been grown? Or are you doing a fair amount of, breeding and experimentation as well?
Yeah, I'd say the last few years have been more like curating and collecting, like finding things that I think will do well here, sourcing them, adding them to my trees. So a lot of the trees are multi-grafted, so I can have a bunch of different varieties and trial them and figure out what will do best. And then over time, probably reduce that diversity based on what I experience is like the best for this climate. So lots of learning for sure and figuring out what's really well suited to the site. Yeah. And then sort of dabbling in the plant breeding. I have a couple different strains of perennial vegetables, especially that I'm playing around with a fair bit and selecting for the characteristics I want and having a couple generations going. And I'd love to do more of that over time. So looking at, especially when you're looking at both annuals and perennials, but kind of those open pollinated, really diverse seed mixes where it's not necessarily all uniform. You're not going to get the exact same plant out of a population that you seed. I'm really curious about that, how to select for the diversity of plants that can handle really differing characteristics. So if we have a wet year or a dry year or a hot year or a cool year, having crops that at least something will survive. So the plant breeding I'd love to do more of in future years, but I'm definitely just like dabbling in at this point.
Yeah, I'd imagine, especially when you're talking about trees, it's a huge time commitment as well. Like how many years would it take to, figure out if a certain cultivar is well adapted,
Yeah.
like
And I don't know if I have the patience
yeah.
to do trees. Like I have friends that are tree breeders, and it's amazing. They're like long game approach to working with the, getting the characteristics they're looking for. I find perennial vegetables, and those are much easier because you have a quicker turnaround. You can kind of see results in a couple of years. So I think that's for me where I'd start with. And then when it comes to the trees, it's more selecting, like finding really good specimens, selecting them, kind of being aware of who they're being pollinated by, so that you're just continually choosing the best genetic populations you can find without having to like breed them out for 25 years and trial them. So that's more of the more seed selecting, I guess, than actively breeding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I remember you mentioning once you have a history of, if not, full on farm. You have a lot of agriculture or gardening in your background, and the previous generations. Hey, you come from.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky that my parents had an organic berry farm for the decade before I was born, and we had it till I was about 5. So I didn't grow up on this berry farm, but it was like definitely a part of our family culture, and a food appreciating family. And so, yeah, berries and fruit were a big part of my childhood. So I'm really glad for that. And then, yeah, my mom came from a big prairie farming family, and her family were all farmers, back as sharecroppers in England. And that's as far back as we've gone with our history. So there's definitely agricultural roots, and it's nice to kind of look back on that and learn from that family history. And even though what I'm doing is very different than the farming of previous generations, it's still great to keep my hands in the soil and know that that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, that's definitely a very cool thing to continue. And just for me, looking around, obviously in the Kootenays, we have, again, not necessarily the most hospitable climate and soils for, conventional large scale growing, but it seems like a ton of passionate individuals. And, that this is a very, it's a very big question, but I wondered if you had thoughts on what sustainable agriculture and food systems would look like specific to our area. It could either be, it could either be an overall ideology, or, oh, we need to grow more kale, anything between those two. Just because I know that especially around here, just with events in even just BC this year, like heat waves and mudslides and everything, I think even people who haven't been thinking about it are taking more of a look at local food supplies. They see the disruptions that can occur from,
Totally.
Yeah. So yeah, any specific things like, for our West Kootenay area that seem salient?
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what we've talked about, I think really working with the land base that you have access to, and rethinking what agriculture looks like to suit that is really key. We're working with a lot of slopes, previously forested areas. It's a very different kind of hillside production that is possible here. So I think rethinking what agriculture looks like, and there's such a rich homesteading culture in the Kootenays where a lot of people came here as back to the landers and have their own orchard and their own small homesteads going on, and those are already sites of really great abundance and production. So I think cultivating more of that and really trying to intensify that on any land that is usable, I think will really help increase food security locally. We have a really great emerging community of especially young farmers. It's great seeing more and more younger people who are starting up farm businesses who, whether they're an organic market garden or, a regenerative, grazing system, whatever it might be. I think supporting local is obviously really, really key. So yeah, just looking at it from multiple directions. But I think anytime people have access to land, whether they consider it farmland or not, just looking at it creatively and saying, how can I make use of that? So for me, that's like food forestry, I think has a great potential in this area, that integrating perennials in that whole sort of functioning ecosystem model, those systems do great on our slopey, funky hillsides of the Kootenays.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting. I get the same sense as well that there's, a ton of local, especially young people who are really inspired and doing cool things with sustainable agriculture. I sometimes I wonder if that is how much that is self-selected because, I am a young person in the agriculture. So
those are the people you know.
Yeah, those are the people who are my friends. So,
yeah.
I think it definitely is a lineage and tradition. There are some, but I really appreciate the young culture here around growing. There are a lot of people who are, have gone beyond the dabbling stage and really are passionate about making food and food security their life work. So that's fantastic. Just to talk specifically about soil for a minute or two. So, I grow mushrooms in a very simple way, right? Like I'm growing, primary decomposers, saprophytes that basically I grow them in a sterile environment and you just, you start with inputs and then you get a product. It's a very reductionist, simple system, but obviously there are the uses of fungi in gardening systems just have pretty much infinite complexity. Two books I'm kind of reading simultaneously right now are both Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard, she's just like exploded in popularity in the last year and for good reason. It's she's got super interesting things. And then I think the other one, I'm going to misquote it here, but is it called Mycelium Planet?
Running?
No.
Mycorrhizal Planet.
Mycorrhizal Planet.
Michael Phillips.
Yeah. You have that one?
Yeah, I borrowed it from the library several times. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just getting started. That one has a ton of useful information, especially it seems like as it relates to, people like, fruit tree growers and stuff like that.
Totally. Michael Phillips wrote the holistic orchard and the organic apple grower. Yeah. So he has a fruit growing background coming at that book, which is cool.
Yeah. So I guess that was a long preamble to the question. Is there anything you're actively doing to encourage fungal diversity within your soils or systems, or is just letting it do its thing, don't touch it, don't disturb it, basically the philosophy?
Yeah. It's funny, like when I started, I was way more active in like bringing in the fungal communities that I wanted, like especially working with a really degraded site. Like when I put in my blueberry bushes, like in that row, I dug a trench. I brought in all these like half decomposed logs that I could find just to give that like not just a soil sponge, but also to introduce some of fungal diversity into the soil. I've purchased fungal inoculants for mycorrhizal, mostly kind of like a diverse arbuscular mycorrhizal dips and things for trees, but I haven't been doing that in recent years because I feel like once I've got those in the system, they're fairly established, I'm assuming, because the trees are thriving and the soil hasn't been disturbed. And I've been kind of following those principles of ensuring that they always have a diverse host. So yeah, I think about mycorrhizal fungi a lot in my decision-making around soil disturbance and how I'm planting things and which cover crops I'm using. But I'd say I don't have a set philosophy. It's mostly that I just okay, what am I going to do? And is this going to enhance the fungal community or not? So one thing with preparing our new squash bed for this year, I put down a really thin coating of compost right on top of this raw, really inhospitable soil. And then sowed a really diverse, cover crop community and just made sure that there were brassicas, there was buckwheat in there. Those are non-mycorrhizal. So I just make sure that they're balanced with enough legumes and grasses and other cover crops that have strong mycorrhizal associations. And then when I inoculate that soil and then I seed it, I know that I'm at least giving a living root to feed that population and help it get established. So thinking about, plant families and crop rotations as well is another thing. But yeah, and then I figure once they're in place, I'm hoping that just the practices keep them thriving and healthy. The only mushrooms I'm actively integrating beyond arbuscular mycorrhizal inoculants is is the stropharia. But then there's tons of other saprophytes that pop up. Like over time, I'm noticing like just like more and more mushrooms showing up in all the berry rows, not just stropharia. So it seems like they're arriving, they're coming in on the mulch, the spores are dropping and finding a good community to live in. So yeah, that seems to just be like a dynamic evolving system. Yeah. I should say though, I am really wanting to make on-farm inoculant this year. That's one of my projects. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'll hopefully be making like a mycorrhizal inoculant from our forest soil nearby to see how that goes. And I have a friend who's got a really good microscope and is a soil food web analyst. So hopefully he'll be helping identify which fungi I'm actually propagating through that process.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I assume in our native forest soils, it's more of an ectomycorrhizal community as opposed to endomycorrhizal, like the arbuscular mycorrhizae you were talking about. I really appreciated hearing that. And I think that's a really actionable point that you made, that maybe knowing, even if you don't know, because it's so hard to know how mycorrhizae are functioning in soil. Like it's just like impossible. There's so many species and varieties. It's so hard to observe. But knowing, as you said, which plants do not form mycorrhizal associations is probably easier than knowing which ones that do, because that's a small thing. And then you just, as you say, you can plan your planting so there is some continuity in those soils, and any fungal life does have a symbiotic partner at all times.
Totally. Like the list, what is it? Is it 95% have some sort of mycorrhizal association? It's a really small percentage of the entire plant kingdom that is non-mycorrhizal. Yeah. So it's much easier to learn them than it is to learn the other side.
Yeah, it's kind of like the philosophy of, mushroom foraging, where it's really good to learn, the poisonous amanitas as well as the, pine mushrooms.
Yeah.
You want to learn the ones that you're not going to need as well as the good ones. Well, thank you. I realize we're almost out of time here, Kim. Just quickly, I guess I know you're also doing quite a bit of teaching as well these days. You've got an online course ongoing or starting up. Is that right?
I have a food forest design course that runs through the winter. This year it's January, February. So that's started up and it's been great. Have a group of people from kind of all over the interior of BC in that class. And I'll probably run that again next winter. And then for the growing season, we've got an ecological gardening workshop series in the works. I'm still nailing down all the different topics and dates, but hopefully have that out on the website pretty soon. And it'd just be nice to bring people together and learn about different topics, and bring in different experts that are interested in regenerative growing of all forms. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that should be really good. I think this education piece fits in really well with everything you've been talking about. Where can people find you?
ThimbleHillNursery.com is the website. Also on Instagram and Facebook. Any of those are easy to reach me. But feel free to reach out if you're interested in any of the stuff we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And are you doing your farm stand as well again this year?
Yeah, do the farm stand this year. It's going to be a bit more focused on fruit, which I'm excited about, as our fruit crops are starting to produce more. Fruit, duck eggs, and then squash and garlic will be the main crops this year. So that's what you'll find. So we're on Coniris Road, which is just up off Heddle, in the 6 Mile area. So you can find that on the website. But come stop by the farm stand during fruit season, and hopefully there will be some tasty things to take away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate chatting to you and nerding out a little bit. And it's great to talk. And thank you for sharing your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.